Hi everyone, I'm Tanny Wang. Welcome to my channel, Tanny Music Talk. Today I am so excited to welcome this phenomenal pianist, educator, and composer, Victor Rosenbaum. So without further ado, let's get into it. Pianist Victor Rosenbaum has concertized widely as soloist and chamber music performer. As a renowned teacher himself, served as chair and faculty member at New England Conservatory and Mannes School of Music. He has also been visiting professor at Eastman School of Music and guest teacher at Juilliard. Hi, Victor Rosenbaum. It was so nice to have you here.
It's very nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, so I remember
Actually, you're in my home, so I'm very happy to have you here in my house.
Yeah, very funny was that I remembered you have been on my jury for 2 times when I was at New England Conservatory. And then after the pandemic, the final was not able to give it offline.
Well, I always enjoyed hearing you, and I hope I was helpful and kind in my comments.
Yes. So the first questions I would like to ask you about is how did you start with your piano journey? How did it all begin?
Well, according to the family legend, which I've been told by my parents, I was taken when I was a little boy, maybe 4 years old, to a restaurant where there was somebody playing background music for the dinner.
Oh.
And I just went over and stood by him and stared for an hour and fascinated. And then when I came home, I started playing piano on tabletops, pretending to play. And so my parents got me a toy piano, and I started finding little tunes on the toy piano. And then after a while, they got me a real piano, and I started lessons when I was 5. So that's how it began.
Wow.
Something about the piano just fascinated me, just seeing it played.
Yes, totally. I remembered I started to play the piano, not first on the piano, but on piano toys, which my parents bought me.
Mm-hmm.
And they only have a few 8 keys, but I was enjoying somehow.
Anything that makes, if you're fascinated by sound, anything that makes sound and that you can start making melodies on is very appealing.
Yes, yes. And then when I was reading your bio, I noticed you had experiences studying with Rosina Lhevinne. How was that experience?
Rosina Lhevinne?
Yes.
Well, it was wonderful. I was already 15, so I had had lessons for 9 or 10 years already when I studied with her. And that was at the Aspen Music Festival in Colorado. And it was just 2 summers with her, but of course to be in that environment with very talented young students from all over the country and all over the world was very stimulating for a kid who just grew up in Indianapolis, which is not a major city, but it's a good-sized city in the Midwest of the United States. But I had not had the experience of being with so many motivated, talented students as I found at Aspen. And she brought students with her from Juilliard, and as you know, Rosina Lhevinne became very famous as the teacher of many competition winners.
Yes.
And especially Van Cliburn. That's when everybody got to know her name, because when Van Cliburn won the Tchaikovsky competition, first American to win, and so she became famous along with him, and then she had generations of students afterwards, although she was, quite old already at that time. But she brought with her to this country the Russian pedagogical tradition.
Yes, yes.
And so that I learned a tremendous amount from her and from being around such talented students that she had. For example, my roommate that first summer was Jimmy Lhevinne, who went on to become the conductor of the Metropolitan Opera for more than 40 years, and a very famous pianist conductor.
Yes, yes.
So there were talented kids of that level there. So it was very, very stimulating for me.
I heard she was fascinated also by her husband a lot.
Well, Joseph Lhevinne, of course, was a very famous teacher in his own right, but she outlived him by many, many years. But yes, they were a very famous couple. They met at the Moscow Conservatory, and then they emigrated to this country, and they became very prominent teachers in the United States.
I heard yourself teaching so many students ranging from age of 7 to teenagers to adults. And also I heard from Chi that there's one of your students moved from China to Las Vegas and then decided to be in Boston just to get closer to you.
That's true. You know, on the internet, people find each other, as you know, very easily through YouTube and through Facebook in one way or another. And this family emigrated from China and settled in Las Vegas. And they found me online and liked my music and contacted me. And the boy was 8 years old at the time.
Wow.
And we got acquainted through internet. And then I even visited Las Vegas once when I was on my way to Los Angeles, where my grandchildren live. And I got to know the family, and first time hearing the boy in person. And he had a lesson. And then they decided they would move to the Boston area to be part of NEC, New England Conservatory Prep Division, and so that he could have lessons with me. So he's a wonderful, very talented student. He's 9 now, it's a year later, and he's playing already his 4th Beethoven sonata. He's working on the Pathétique now.
Wow.
And playing it, I must say, very well, not only technically, but musically. He seems to understand and want to know how to play things really beautifully and artistically. And that's what really matters to me. There are lots of people who can achieve, although not often at that early an age, but can achieve technical accomplishment. But to be able to play artistically made me feel there's something really special about the boy. So I'm taking a lot of interest in him, spending a lot of time with him.
So there's a lot of talents besides just hard work.
Yes, it's talent, it's interest, it's having good teaching, of course, helps. But yes, it's kind of a miracle how one talent will emerge very early.
Yes.
And develop quickly, and other talents develop more slowly or not at all. Depends very much on circumstances, what they're exposed to. I want this boy to be exposed to the whole world of music. I took him to the Boston Symphony about 2 weeks ago. First time for him to be in a major concert hall hearing an orchestra concert with a duo piano soloists playing Mozart concerto. And so I'm sort of treating him like my musical son and want to expose him to piano recitals, orchestra concerts. I want him to listen to a lot of music online. And I've told him it's not enough just to play Beethoven sonatas. He should hear Beethoven symphonies and string quartets too.
So I would like to know if you have different approaches or different expectations from different ages of students.
Well, I haven't taught students that young very much for a long time. When I was in graduate school and also just starting out as a teacher, even as an undergraduate, I taught children. But then I was lucky to come to the New England Conservatory right out of graduate school, so I've almost always been teaching college and graduate level. And now I've taken, for the first time in many years, some younger students. The boy that I was talking about, who's 9, and a couple of high school age students who are 16 and 17, who are also very accomplished, and really enjoy working with younger students, younger than college-age students. I really love teaching students of any age if they're motivated and want to learn. And the idea of talent is a very mysterious thing. I've seen students, and I've had students who didn't seem, exceptionally talented when I first met them, even at college age or even at the master's level. That's why I said earlier that talent and ability can develop at different rates. This 9-year-old is unusually good for his age. But I've told him already, at 9 you may be one of the best at your age. But when you're 15 or 16 or 17, you look around and suddenly there are a lot of people playing at your level. They've all sort of caught up because they developed maybe a little more gradually. And then when you're applying for college, then suddenly there are lots of really good ones who are accomplished, who've worked hard. And maybe they weren't that exceptional at age 8 or 9, but the progress has been steady. And so if you really want to stay ahead of the pack and develop to your best, you have to keep at it. You have to keep working because there are others coming up behind you. It's not to instill a competitive spirit. I don't really even believe in competing with others. I know competitions are part of the musical world that we live in, and they can provide good opportunities for students to be heard and to advance their careers. But I believe one should really not compete against others in general, but against yourself, just to find your own best voice and your best ability and to be your best self. But ultimately the reality is that if you want to go into the profession, there will be many people competing for the same positions. So those who work hard are the ones who will succeed. And as I was starting to say, I've had students, even at the master's level, who didn't seem to have a really sparkling, intense talent, but with good teaching and motivation, I was just amazed at what they could achieve. The development came later than for some students, but they became really fine musicians, fine pianists, and able to teach and pass on to the next generation, because that's the way the music is kept alive. It's from one generation to the next, passing on. And I'm hoping that my students will be the teachers of the next generation. And of course, they will take not only what I've given them, but what others have given them. And each person makes their own kind of amalgamation, if you will, or combination of various influences from their teachers, from their chamber music coaches, from what they've heard. And they don't become mini versions or next generation versions of me. They become their own selves, which is a unique combination of who they are, their own personalities, their own inclinations, their own intelligence, and all the influences that they've absorbed. So I know that my influence is just one influence among many that my students will have as they make their musical journey. And many of those influences often happen before I ever meet them, when they are 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Especially all the years that I was teaching college students. By the time they came to me, they had already made up their minds that they wanted to be musicians, and they already had a high skill level. So the teachers that I really admire the best, or the most, I should say, are the teachers who teach very young children. And if that's what you're doing, and that's what so many young teachers do, I'm full of admiration for that work. Because as I said, mostly I've taught students who already have a good background and have made a commitment to music. But the people who teach young children are building that commitment. They're giving them the foundation.
Yes.
And they are the ones who have to provide the inspiration to make that journey.
Yes, to always provide interest. And also I think the role of family, the support from the family is very critical at the beginning of a children's early stage. Whereas later for a musician, if he is really driven himself to being in this career, he would self-driven a lot instead of the family being back up there.
Of course. Parents who are supportive can be a very important factor in musical growth. And I know a lot of parents want to come to the lesson, make videos now, and help their students practice during the week. It's a delicate balance, of course, between pushing too much or being too involved and not letting the young student become independent. Some parents, I think, take too active a role, and others just drop the kid off for the lesson and go work or shop and come and have no involvement at all. It should be something in between, I think, if possible.
I think it's more like the legs of the tripods.
Right, the support,
yes.
The guidance can be very helpful for young students. It's hard for them sometimes to remember what the teacher said and to practice completely independently during the week. So parents with some musical background or who've paid attention to the lesson can help very young students. But I've seen cases where that parental involvement lasts too long and the student never develops real independence of thought and understanding. That's really important to be a musician.
Yeah. Well, also I'm curious that as a performer, how do you balance your teaching life and your performing life?
Well, we all have to deal with 24 hours in the day. We're all under the same constraint. So if you just try to find the hours, you eke out the hours. For many years, I was director of a school just across the river from Boston, the Langy School of Music, for 16 years. So I had an administrative job, and I was in the office all day. And then going to concerts many nights each week to hear faculty concerts, student concerts, because in a small school I felt the director's role is to show an interest in what everyone is doing. So during those years it was very difficult, but I was giving concerts and teaching also. I just managed somehow on weekends and in between and early morning and late night to practice and prepare concerts. There's nothing like having a concert to force you to find time to prepare. So most of my career I've taught more than I've performed in terms of just how the year and the day is divided up. I may give 20 concerts a year, 25, sometimes 30. I was never one of those people who was touring constantly and giving 60, 70, 80, 90 concerts a year. I never did that. But I was mostly here for my students, and that was what was very important to me. But if I had something once a month or twice a month, I prepared for it, of course. You want to do your best when you go on stage. So it's just a balance. And I think you learn from teaching in a way that helps your performance. I mean, how can you not? If you're telling students 5, 6 hours a day certain things of what to think about, what to notice, what to love in the music, how can that not help you in your own playing,
Yeah, yeah.
to notice more, to be more attentive, to listen more clearly, and to find more in the music to love.
Yeah.
Some while ago you asked about teaching students of different ages. And I actually don't think there's a lot of difference in how, at least I teach them. The main difference is that you speak to a young child in language that they understand, which means not too complicated, not too including references to things that they would not have experienced or would have no way of knowing about. But in teaching a young child, the goals are the same as teaching a college student.
Exactly.
To develop good technical facility, to train the ear to listen carefully, to have musical ideas, to realize that music is always expressive of something. It has character, it has shape, it has design. And I was lucky to have a wonderful first teacher. And I've actually been able to help some of my students become teachers by referring to some of the things that she did with me. I actually remember my first lesson at age 5 with this teacher. I learned a 3-note piece that taught several things about music. The piece was called Stepping Up. Stepping up, stepping down, then a skip. So that's the piece. Stepping up, stepping down, then a skip. So, what do you learn from that little 3-note piece? For anyone can learn that in just a few minutes at the first lesson. Well, you learn about direction, that music rises and it falls. It goes up and it goes down. It can go up stepwise, stepping up from key to key, or it can skip a key. And of course, when you start reading the music, then that gets explained. That when it goes from space to line or line to space, that's a step. But when it goes from line to line, that's a skip. Because there's a note in between. So you learn about that. But she went further than just the idea of direction. She tried to say that those notes, those 3 notes that went up and then went down, were like a family of notes. They belonged together. And that there could be a feeling of grouping those notes. Like draw. So
it's no longer 3
she could
notes.
actually introduce the concept of dropping on the key and then lifting the wrist. Now, you know, many beginners look like they're kind of crippled. They're going because they're looking at right from the beginning at a black dot on the page, and then they're looking where I'm supposed to put my finger and the next finger. So before you know it, they're all tied in knots of trying to remember all those things that they're supposed to do. My first teacher thought you should just teach some things without reading at first, just so they got used to the keyboard. So I learned drop and lift, drop and lift. So I was learning phrasing. Drop, drop, lift, drop. A slur, tie-um, tie-um. So I'm teaching actually the same thing to graduate students that I was beginning to learn a little bit of at my very first lesson about how the hand can inflect a musical gesture. Now, if you've been playing all your by the time you get to a 2-part invention of Bach, and you're playing it just finger by finger by finger, absolutely flat without any shape and just mechanically in time, then it's going to be very hard later on to learn to play musically, because that was not part of the plan from the beginning. The plan was only you learn the notes, you build a strong hand, you play in rhythm and in time, but not necessarily musically. So then when musical concepts are introduced, it becomes harder to learn. And even advanced students often say, well, at first, and teachers sometimes advise this even, just learn all the notes and rhythms correctly and accurately and put the expression in later. I've heard that said, put the expression in later, as if expression were something that you could just take with like the vaccination needle. Okay, I'll put a little expression here, a little there.
Some add-on. No, that's a disaster.
An add-on, yes, something you do later. I tell my students that you have to try to think musically from the first reading, even if it's still a little clumsy and not completely accurate. Get an idea of what the piece is going to be like, so that you find out what kinds of motions, what kinds of technique will be right for the sound that you want for that music. Because you could practice it one way just to play the notes, and that way could turn out to be completely incompatible with what you want to do when you decide what you feel the musical side of things involves.
Because I think if it's only technique, then you just shut off your most important senses, the ear, when playing.
That's right. You've hit on it, Tanny. It's the most important thing. Is people think learning piano is about the fingers, which of course is important. The fingers are what make contact with the key. Ultimately, the key goes down to produce sound. But how the key goes down and with what kind of motion, whether it's a percussive motion or a stroking, gentle motion, how much weight you put into it, has to do with the sound you want. And very often I think that students are not taught about wanting a sound. A teacher will correct wrong notes, correct wrong rhythms, and give musical advice like crescendo more here, take a little time here, but not necessarily helping the student to know why that crescendo needs to be more, or what the emotional message of the music is. So I think we need to, although it's difficult to do everything all at once, I think we need to think about the music through our imaginations, through our heart and soul and mind as we learn. Because very often, and I've been telling teachers and students this increasingly in recent years, we go from the visual, what we see on the page, to the hand, directly. And in fact, there's a name for that, eye-hand coordination. And it's important. To be a good sight reader, you know, throw something in front of you, you're accompanying a ballet class. So you want to be able to look at the music and play right away what you see. You're not really thinking, oh, what's the emotional message? You're just sight reading, and you want it to be as good as it can be. But the problem with eye-hand coordination as an end goal is that it bypasses two other important organs of the body, the heart and the mind. And for music, those are really the most important organs of the body. Yes, we play with our hands, with our arms, with our wrists, but we feel and we imagine the music through our mind and through our hearts. And one thing that seems to have been useful in recent months and years that I've been saying and seems to have an impact is to remind people that the music they play, that they learn from a piece of paper with notation on it, that music existed in someone's head, the composer's head, before it was ever on paper. And our job, I think, is not to take it from the paper and put it directly to our hands, but to put it back in our heads as a thought, as an idea, as a feeling of how it could be, how it could sound. So yes, we can play. But it might remain in that state more than we would wish, even though we think we can put the expression in later, after several weeks of learning a piece, just being in time metronomically, without thinking about the shape of the phrase or the emotional message of the music. Habits get formed. Muscular habits, habits of hearing, habits of thinking.
Yeah.
So I really feel like what I teach increasingly is music appreciation. Now, some people laugh when I say that because in college, like universities, the subject of music appreciation is usually a course for non-music majors to teach them something about classical music. But at its highest form, music appreciation is to really appreciate the music, everything that's there, everything that's in the music that the composers thought of, felt, experienced, wrote down, organized. The more we can appreciate, the more vital and vibrant our performances will be.
Since you are playing the intermezzo, first I want to congrats for the last pieces of Brahms you recorded.
That's my most recent recording. The last pieces of Brahms came out about a year ago. Thank you.
I was actually practicing the intermezzo a few months ago. And
That one?
Yes,
that very one?
Yes. I found it was extremely hard to play those intimate and subjective pieces because sometimes as pianists we feel what we feel as we play, but I felt there's limitations. So my question would be how to break these limitations and then be as free as possible.
Part of it has to do with how you practice, because if your association with the piece is hearing yourself learn the notes, pretty soon you might think of the piece the way you've heard yourself play it. And that becomes a limitation in itself. So in addition to practicing at the keyboard to learn the notes, where they are, and to coordinate the two hands well, I always recommend some silent practice, looking at the music and really just thinking the music. Maybe imagining how it would be sung or how a violin might play that line, or just to give yourself some ideas about different colors and different timbres, and just to discover the emotion of the music. And an important part of it also is to also be observant of everything that's in the score, even though musical notation can't tell you everything, like timing and rubato. It does provide a lot of information. For example, in that piece, there are a lot of two-note slurs. Even the upbeat is marked as a slur. It's not, those three notes don't go one after another directly.
Yeah.
They go time. And even that is more beautiful because immediately there's a little breathing on, breathing on. And then one might think about the difference between these two notes that just go a short distance, then a skip, stepping and then a skip, and the same two notes, and then a big skip. What it means that big skip of a seventh, how does that make you feel? Do we want to there I am, or do we want to feel the tenderness of reaching for something that isn't so easy to get to? Maybe making that high note a little softer, so it's a little more tender, as if that interval is a kind of poignant interval. Now, some editions that have indications that are not Brahms actually do put a little hairpin crescendo there. Yeah. But that is not the way Brahms wrote it. I think Brahms wanted to experience that kind of reaching for something difficult. Then there's a crescendo and a diminuendo. Then the same interval, but harmonized differently. Before, it was with a D major. Now it's... So, the harmony has to speak to you. I maintain that if you look carefully at the music and you listen to what's going on, the music will speak to you. It will tell you what it needs. You'll start hearing things. It's just a matter of paying attention and not taking anything for granted. Suddenly a D sharp in a key that doesn't have D sharp. So that, of course, becomes some kind of an event. Now, how you experience that event, or so listening to the music, trying different things, never contradicting the score, never going against the score, never doing anything that is opposite to what the composer wrote down, but realizing that there's no way the composer can write everything that is part of a performance. Think of what is not notatable. I already mentioned timing. It's probably the most important thing about music, because music is an art that exists in time. So of course, pacing and timing becomes the most important ingredient. Another thing that cannot be notated is balance of voices. If I play, I have many options of which voice to bring out, how much to bring it out, how much less the other voices should be. That's all a matter of judgment. In fact, everything that you see on the page, except the pitches themselves, involve personal judgment.
Yeah, I think
how soft is a piano? How loud is a forte? How moving is the andante? What's the balance of the voices? Where should I take a little time? All of those things are part of what makes music beautiful, but they're not notated. We really just have the bare bones. But even with just the bare bones, so often many things are overlooked.
Yeah, I think it's about how to balance and always shape the score when internalize the piece in yourself. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think we need to be inspired by the music. the composers were inspired to write the music from some personal experience, from understanding somehow the human condition. Everything that is experienced by humans is expressed in music. Joy, sadness, yearning, all the aspects of being alive are expressed in music. And somehow the composers found a way to convey all those aspects of the human experience through music. So we have to be inspired by what they wrote down and the harmonies they chose and the voices that they chose and the melodies that they composed and every aspect of what they composed. The choice to be high, to be low, to be soft, to be loud, thin texture, thicker texture, all of those things influence us, and we need to be inspired. If we just practice and put in hours a day just going over the notes, we lose inspiration. So I think teachers need to inspire, and the practice session also needs to be a place not only of drill, which it often is and needs to be to an extent, but a place of experimentation and discovery to find the sound, the way it will be satisfying, that matches what you can imagine in your head.
Yes, yes, yeah. And sorry, here just comes the next question. Since you are talking about for humanity, I'm just wondering, do you think that Beethoven's music is for the whole humanity? As you also recorded the Beethoven 2 discs, and one of which was acclaimed for the top 10 classical music. So that's why I want some tips from you for Beethoven. As we all know, Beethoven's music has been profoundly changed in his late life. Do you think that there are probably that reasons of the flair of the French Revolution and maybe his personal life that both contribute his dramatically change? Do you think those were the main reasons that drive him to produce those works in his late life period?
Well, of course, everything that an artist produces is influenced by the course of his life, when he lives, where he lives, the time in history, what came before, the circumstances of his life. The Brahms that I was just playing is, one of many in these last pieces that sometimes people feel represents Brahms' regret or nostalgia or wistfulness, sadness maybe for what was not achieved during his lifetime in terms of romance perhaps, or relationship or love. It always seems, in many of the pieces, seems to be a kind of yearning for something that is not quite attainable. And just when it's, like in that piece, there's a place where the music seems to almost be on the verge of saying, yes, it's possible. Like, yes, Tina, I can have it. But at the same time that I feel the intensity of the melody in the right hand, I can't help but notice that Brahms, in his compositional genius, was able to take the first three notes of the piece and put them in the bass. So that's a moment that seems to be saying, yes, I want it and I can have it. I love you. Yes, I love you. But in the next moment, it turns quiet it turns to minor as if to say, but no, I can't have it. I'll never have it. So just the turn from forte and major to piano and minor can express a wealth of emotional experience. Now, your question was about Beethoven, one of the most emotional and expressive composers. I think everybody would agree with that. Sometimes we like to put composers in boxes of categories, and that the romantic composers like Brahms and Chopin and Liszt are the ones who really express a lot of emotion, and the classical composers, well, they're more restrained and they don't really convey that much emotion. They're very nicely made pieces and more symmetrical and balanced without these wild flights of fantasy. But I don't really believe that. I think Bach has a romantic side. I think Mozart has a romantic side. I think Beethoven has a romantic side. If by romantic you mean telling a story, telling the story of the human experience. So this certainly we feel something powerful from those opening measures. Dramatic, stern, but also kind of imploring, ta-ta-ta-ti, ta-ta-ta-ta, as if reaching for something. Later, Beethoven developed sonata form in ways that are almost fantasy-like. I mean, how different the late sonatas are in their material and also form from the early sonatas, like this. It's almost like an improvisation, a fantasy. And yet it does follow the basic outline of sonata form, just transformed. So yes, I think Beethoven was, of course, affected by the things that he experienced personally, his various maladies, illnesses. Later in life, certainly his deafness had an effect on his mood and his disposition. But you know, it's possible that his deafness was some kind of in a strange way, a blessing in disguise, because without being able to hear what everybody else was composing around him, the commonplace things, he was able to just listen to inside. To the.
It was amazing. He still composed the symphony.
Yes,
actually.
But he heard, you know, a person of that kind of genius didn't need to figure it out at the piano and find it. He heard the music in his head. And it may be that the music he heard in his head became more advanced because he wasn't constantly hearing the more conventional music around him that was being played and composed. So he went way beyond anything that would normally have been expected for that time. In the use of the piano, the high trills at the end of Opus 111, you know, the use of the entire keyboard, the transformation of form, was very exploratory music. So of course, every creative artist, I think, creates from their experience of being alive. And they may draw on their joys as well as their sorrows and their frustrations. But of course, the music that they write, the poetry that they write, the novels that they write, the paintings that they paint, whatever the medium, it reflects the individual and that individual's experience in the world. Their personality and also their interactions with other people, their responses to nature, their responses to politics, to natural disaster.
Beethoven loves nature.
All of life.
Yes.
And that's why the great musical works that we love and study and play and have survived for hundreds of years speak to people in every corner of the world. It's quite an amazing thing that even hundreds of years after music is composed, it's still being appreciated, practiced, and performed because it seems to speak to our times also. It speaks to the human condition.
I think at this time of the world spectrum, which we live in a very sustainable, very comfortable life, where we have our cell phones, we live in these concrete buildings that sometimes we forget to be in the nature and then be just out of Wi-Fi. And then also I found sometimes we have all this information coming up where our brain just so addicted to these short impulses, which we really doesn't have enough time for us to soak and then to take time to have the inner insight.
I do think, Tani, that you hit on an issue of our time, which is concentration and attention span. And, you know, just a quick text rather than really reading a book or reading a whole article, just looking up something on Wikipedia and getting a little fact here and a little fact there. And the constant interruption that we live with, of getting a text, getting a call, never being out of touch, not really having time for contemplation or looking deep within. I think that is an issue for our time. I think it's, in a very short time, in 20 years, I think social behavior and interactions of people have changed a lot. And the expectation is that we can be constantly in touch with everybody and we have to know what someone is thinking at every minute. Some of my students will remember a little talk I gave at a studio class a couple of years ago about not being constantly on your phone when you're practicing. And I told them that just shortly before most of them were born, we never even knew if someone was trying to get in touch with us during the day until we went back and checked our answering machines on our home phones. And you'd get a bunch of messages, call me back, and that's how you got in touch with someone. And now we expect to be in constant touch with everyone. And so I think that makes us a little less focused and a little less centered. Obviously, we can't do away with that technology. We love our phones. I love my phone. But we have to somehow learn to live with it and not let it dominate us completely.
I was practicing to live without phone for a while. So I turned off my phone totally during the daytime. And I told my parents, which they were in Shanghai, just to let them know that I just turned off the phone, but I'm still okay. And then actually I found I'm more into my own stuff. I'm more into my own piano playing, actually, when I was practicing.
Of course, of course. I told my students, just try to go 30 minutes. You tried to go a whole day. That's very admirable. But you know, if you're used to having your phone next to your music and seeing what text has just come in, you can't really be concentrating well. So maybe my suggestion was too moderate. I said, just try to go 30 minutes without the phone being there at all. Practice, and then check and see if there's something important you need to follow up on. Follow up, and then do another 30 minutes. Maybe I should have encouraged an hour or a whole morning session, but I thought maybe that was too much to ask. So how was your day without the phone?
It was really satisfying. I was able to really read a book, to have more efficient time playing, and I felt it was fresh.
Yeah, of course. Well, I think it's a good thing for us all to try to have some focused, concentrated time away from our devices.
Yeah, so that's why I want to have this talk with you. So instead of people got access from the master classes, which only short amount of time, instead of a long period of stream of thoughts or talks, to really know about you and then know about your philosophies.
Well, I think I've explained my basic philosophy, and I think it's applicable to students of all ages. That yes, little kids have to be taught some rudiments of hand position, and they have to build up some strength little by little. But even from the beginning, they can start thinking about sound and inflections and shapes and phrases. And that the most important thing that we're training when we become musicians is our ear. After all, music is sound, so the ear is the most important thing. If we don't hear what we're doing well, hear that this harmony is blurred with a pedal, or hear that it's not a good balance between voices, then we will have nothing to practice. We won't know what needs fixing. So we have to hear, and we have to match what we hear ourselves play against what we would like to hear. And that means training the imagination to imagine how the music could sound. And so, to take another Brahms intermezzo, if you've learned this, if you've learned the notes and you've learned the rhythms correctly, but you've been hearing yourself play it in a very static, kind of vertical way for a long time, it may even be hard to imagine what could be possible because you're so used to that. So after a while, you'll play it maybe a little nicer, but still kind of vertical and heavy. So why not from the first have it in your head that it's going to be and in that case, Opus 117, number 1, we have a clue very carefully notated from Brahms that it's a lullaby. It's an actual lullaby that he took the tune of and made a piano piece out of. So, so I think that it has to have a kind of gentle rocking motion, like the way you'd rock a baby to sleep in a lullaby. Now, one might not be able to play it beautifully and with that kind of forward motion and lilting feeling right from the first day. But if you have that in mind, if you've sort of sung it in your mind, then maybe your practicing will be a slow version of what you want it to be later on when you're able to play it up to tempo. Too often I think we think that slow practice has to be mechanical practice. But if we think of slow practice as simply a slow motion version of the way we would like it to sound when it's up to tempo, then we'll be getting the gestures in our ears, we'll be finding the physical way to produce those gestures.
Yeah, I think it's more of the expansion of the timing in expecting the sound we want, instead of really be mechanic of the notes.
Exactly. It's to think the phrase, to think the gesture, to think the inflection.
Yeah, and I think I would listen more lullaby before bedtime instead of taking pills. Yeah.
It's a lullaby before bedtime, especially if it can be sung to you. It's just perfect.
You also recorded Schubert, all the latest work, and then I was listening and I was just wondering, as our younger generation of pianists, how do we really get to know and how to practice and how to get closer to these late work pieces?
Well, you know, I know that people think a lot about how do you play Bach, how do you play Chopin, how do you play Mozart, how do you play Schubert, how do you play Brahms, and that every composer has its own sound. And I understand what they mean by that. To some extent it's true. You'd never find that spacing of a chord that low in Mozart, for example. But there are times when composers do sound a little bit like each other. For example, that's the beginning of a Schubert sonata.
Yeah.
And I think that's Schubert feeling like, I want to try writing something in a Beethoven sort of character. And he took the key that was associated with the dramatic music of Beethoven, and he wrote a very dramatic piece. But of course, in other music, he's very much more like what we think Schubert is supposed to be, very lyrical and tender. But sometimes Beethoven can be like that too. So we have Schubert sometimes sounding kind of like Beethoven, or what we think Beethoven is supposed to sound like, and Beethoven sometimes sounding like Chopin, like Schubert. So I think there's more to be lost than gained by deciding that each composer has to sound a certain way. Now, sometimes Bach might be very crisp, and even a little bit mechanical, but sometimes it can be very very lyrical, like almost like a Chopin-esque kind of melody. For Schubert, I think the amazing thing is that even his happy music seems to be tinged for me with sadness. Like the piece that I'm reviewing now. It's the last movement of the sonata in major D 959, the second to the last sonata. Now, on the face of it, it's just a pretty melody, nice melody, moving along at a not very slow pace. But something a little tender and sad about it. It's not just completely happy. So one finds the lyricism where it exists, whether it's Schubert or Beethoven or Mozart, and I always try not to limit the potential of the composer to be many things. Once, I like to tell the story about the student I was once teaching in a master class who was playing a Mozart sonata, second movement, the F major sonata. Absolutely dryly and very much in time. Every 16th was exactly in time, no pedal. And so I was trying little by little to say that, well, this is a beautiful melody like a singer might sing in an opera, and maybe it can have a little rubato and a little pedal. And I was saying all of the bad words, all of the trigger words that people think you're not supposed to say about Mozart. Rubato in Mozart, pedal, flexibility. And I was trying to get him to play it. Really touchingly and beautifully. And he just immediately, without missing a beat, turned to me and said, "Oh, I didn't know you were allowed to do that in classical music." So, of course, his teacher, wanting to do the right thing, was teaching him how Mozart was supposed to be played. And, I wondered if Mozart would have felt proud if he had written the piece and thought of it, imagined it that way. Would he have called his wife in from the kitchen to play the new piece that he just, listen to my new piece? I'm sure his wife would say, "Wolfgang, why is your music always so boring?" And he would say, "Well, I'm classical. I can't do anything else." No, of course, composers of all periods wrote music to be beautiful, to be loved, to express tenderness, joy, sadness. But of course, no matter how much timing I do with that Mozart sonata, if I use a little pedal, hopefully it will be more beautiful, but it will never sound like Chopin, because Chopin's vocabulary, his language, the way he used melody and accompaniment were completely different. And if I play a Bach saraband tenderly, it's still going to sound like Bach. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be notey and mechanical to sound like Bach. And of course, whether about playing Bach on the modern piano, that's another issue entirely. But we have to remember that everything Bach wrote for could inflect and shape. Mostly he wrote for voices and strings and oboes and flutes and all instruments that could shape phrases. Only the harpsichord couldn't really shape phrases the way we can on a modern piano. So the modern piano is very, very compatible with Bach, the Bach style, if you will. So I think rather than set parameters, this composer has to be this way, this composer has to be that way, and so on, we should just take the music as it is, find what's beautiful about it, and the style will emerge from the piece itself. I don't think it's necessary to superimpose a style on the piece. Like, you can't do this on this music, or you have to do it this way because it was written before a certain year or a certain date. No, I think that music is something that is living, even if the performers in their own day or the composers in their day might not have thought of something that we might think of. That doesn't mean that our way is wrong, because we do have the benefit of what has come after those composers. And even if we bring back some of that aesthetic understanding to earlier music, it may not be inappropriate. Maybe it will actually make that music even richer by bringing back a perspective of what we know from the music that followed. So just as I don't think the instruments of the day are necessarily the best ones to play the music on, I think the mentality of the time may not always be the best one. Maybe we've learned and grown.
I feel sometimes if you have a model of one sort of a playing, maybe if there's another one which is copying that kind of model, just set it up, but it doesn't mean that is the right way of playing, which you mentioned earlier, that we need to have our own voice and we have to find our own style.
Even if I usually have very strong ideas about what's important in a piece of music, about what things should be noticed, brought out, expressed. But each person will take those things and find their own way to bring them out. It'll be a matter of degree, because we all have different personalities, what I call metabolisms, just the way we process food and information and feeling. We're all individuals, so even if 10 people agree, yes, this is important in the music, this is related to that, we should bring it out, we should show that relationship, everyone will end up with a slightly different way to express or bring out those things, even if they agree on it. But of course they won't agree. People will find different things that are more important. But it's just a way of saying that even if we could agree on everything about a piece of music, still there will be 10 different performances from 10 different people.
How do you think of your playing? Do you criticize your own playing, or?
Oh, that's a difficult question. How do I think of my own playing? Well, of course I'm never satisfied with the performance. I always wish it had been better, and I always feel I could have done better. But as I tell my students, I don't think it's healthy to beat yourself up about what could have been better. Just try to do better the next time and learn from the performance experience. I feel when I'm going back to some pieces from the past, as I am now with a Schubert sonata, I feel like I'm playing it better than I used to. But then I don't really know, because I don't listen to my performances from the past. But I feel like as you develop and grow and know more and experience more, you have more to bring to the music. But no, I feel that we as performers or artists, to use an overused term and somewhat pretentious term, but we as artists are always striving for something beyond. And so I never feel, oh, well, that was great. No, I always am trying to find a better way and to feel more and to understand more in the music. But as I sometimes only half-jokingly would tell people, as I was approaching 53 years of teaching at New England Conservatory. Well, I think I'm finally getting to have the hang of it. I think I'm finally learning how to do this thing. So sometimes I feel that way, that, yeah, I'm finally feel like I'm learning what I need to know.
Wow. That was so admired to listen those words from you. Yeah.
But of course, when you reach that, that peak that you've been climbing to reach, and you get to that top, you realize it's not a top at all, it's only a plateau. And you see there's another, another mountain peak beyond. So there's always more to do. Now that is either going to be very discouraging or very inspiring. You know, music is simply that way. It's never, you never reach the top and say, I've done everything I want to do. I've played that piece as well as it can be played. There's nothing more. At least I never have that feeling, and I don't think most performers have that feeling. And some people can get discouraged by that. And I worked so hard, and then I got to that point and I realized there's still more to be done. But that can be one of the inspiring things about music, that there's always another chapter.
Yeah. I think it's a lifetime journey.
Yeah, a lifetime, right. And during the pandemic, I have learned some new repertoire that I never had found time for. That's been really wonderful. And I'm also going back to some pieces that I played a long time ago. And that's also wonderful. And I'm realizing that the pieces that I've played off and on over my whole career, really it's taken a lifetime to learn to play them at the level that I want and with the depth that I now see is in the music. And that only fills me with greater and greater awe. So I'm relearning a Schubert sonata that he wrote when he was 31, just before he died. And now at almost 80, I'm feeling like, well, maybe I can sort of begin to play this piece finally now. And yet these composers wrote the pieces when they were in their 30s, 20s and
younger.
30s.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet it takes us, in a way, a lifetime to go to the bottom of those wonderful pieces. But we're so lucky that we have a long life to bring to it, and we're so lucky that we have this rich repertoire of music that never gets boring and always continues to feed us. Plus, we have composers in our own time who continue to turn out music that's challenging and beautiful. And so there's so much to discover in music. It never ends.
Thank you. I think it was really an inspiring talk with you. And I think that will be all for today's episode. Really thank you for having me here.
Well, thank you for inviting me to be part of your talk chat, Tanny
Music Talk.
Tanny's Music Talk. It's my honor.
Thank you.
I hope we can meet again.
Yes.